Okay, so first of all, I'm Rabbi Katzman. For those who don't know, I am been here. I'm actually more of a Nebraskan than a New Yorker, even though I come from New York. I've been here longer than I run the Chabad Center here, centered by the Rebbe in 1986, and we're here, thank God. And one of the main projects that the Rebbe actually instituted was that people have kosher mezuzahs on their doorposts, and it's our job to make it available and make people aware of it. In the early years of one of our trips and visits at one of these homes, we asked about the mezuzah. Oh yeah, I bought a mezuzah when I was in Israel, the trip. Beautiful. He says, how about checking it after a while? He says, what do you mean? Yeah, I bought a beautiful mezuzah. It matches the decor in the house. And yeah, I know how to put it up. I didn't even read the instructions. I threw it out.
Oh no.
So the lack of knowledge, unfortunately, probably still exists in certain areas. So it's important to let people know what exactly is involved in the mezuzah. That it's not the cover that you're buying, because the case is merely a case. The mezuzah is really the scroll that's inside that we'll be able to see in just a moment. And that is a biblical commandment that all of our doorposts must have this particular mezuzah, which is written on parchment, and the two sections taken from the Torah, which you'll see in just a moment. And even once you have them written properly, in Nebraska weather, especially when it gets really humid and really cold, the chances of the letters splitting, cracking, even fading after a while are pretty high, which is why every couple of years we should be checking them, which means that certified scribe actually opens it and reviews it and makes sure that there are no cracks. And if there are cracks, then very often they could be just touched up and it becomes kosher again. But as long as it's not touched up and there is a flaw in the mezuzah, you don't technically have a mezuzah on your door, which is something that's important to know. Same thing also applies to tefillin. Phylacteries that we put on in the morning, every weekday, which we'll see in just a moment as well. Those things are important that they be kosher. So if you have one from your grandfather, some people even have it from their great-grandfather, chances of it still being kosher, if it's not been checked in recent years, are very slim. So even though you're doing it and you're saying the bracha is being, the blessing could be technically a blessing in vain, and you're not fulfilling the mitzvah. And in comparison, it's an easy fix when you think about it. So this is something that really it's important. Whoever is here, obviously, is concerned about these things, to know exactly what's involved and the importance of these mitzvahs. I think I'll turn it over to Rabbi Yoni now, and then we'll get back to the subject on hand.
Thank you very much. So my name is Rabbi Yoni. I think I'm here long enough that met most of you. I'm here for already a little bit more than 3 years, and I learned how to become what we call a certified sofer, or court scribe, or whatever we'd like to call it in English. But I would like to go to the end, maybe, and talk a little bit about Geniza, about Shemus, about what exactly it means. So in Judaism, like you all know, we have many things, maybe many items that we use in order to do mitzvahs. We have the talis that you're probably all familiar with. We have tefillin, we have Mezuzah, we have many, many other things. The Torah, of course. We have many things that we use as items in order to fulfill many, many mitzvahs, many laws of the Torah. So it's interesting that the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat talks about what happens if there's a fire on Shabbos in someone's house, and what are you allowed to save on Shabbos if there's a fire. So just for those who don't know, on Shabbos we're not allowed to light fire, and we're not allowed also to blow off the fire. Okay, so the Gemara discusses the topic: what happens if there's a fire in the house? What things you're allowed to save? So one of the topics that the Gemara talks about, the Gemara says, "Matnitin kol kitvei kodesh metzilin otan mipnei adlika בין שקוראים בהן, soon I'll translate, בין שקוראים בהן ובין שאין קוראים בהן, אף על פי שכתובים בכל לשון, הטעונים גניזה, that's the key word, גניזה, טעונים גניזה, ומפני מה הם קוראים בהם? מפני ביטול בית המדרש. So the Gemara basically says, the Gemara gives a braita, kind of a Mishnah, that tells us that everything that basically needs to be Geniza, needs to be taken to Geniza, so we'll explain what exactly it means, but all those things that need to be taken to Geniza, we probably will need to save if there's a fire on Shabbos. Okay, so kind of violating Shabbos by saving things that are holy enough to be Geniza. What does that mean? In order to understand that, we need to go to a different Gemara, the Gemara in Masechet Megillah, page 26, and the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, Tashmishei mitzvah nizrakin, v'tashmishei kedusha nignazin. The Gemara defines all the items that we use in Judaism, Tefillin, Mezuzah, Talis, all these things. And the Gemara says we have what we call Tashmishei mitzvah, things that we use for mitzvah, and we have also Tashmishei kedusha, holy items. And the Gemara separates them and says that Tashmishei Dusha, things that we use for holiness, these things are basically the things that we take to Geniza. Now let's try to explain what Geniza means, or Shemus, or a few other names that we use for that. So Geniza, there are very interesting laws. I'll explain first of all what are things that need to be Geniza to be put in Geniza, and then we'll explain what exactly it means. So the Gemara continues and says that, for example, a sukkah, the lulav and etrog that we use in sukkahs, the shofar that we blow on Rosh Hashanah, and even the tzitzis, the talis that we wear, all those items are tashmishei mitzvah. Okay, tashmishei mitzvah. Okay, and those tashmishei kedusha, these are the tefillin, the mezuzah, the Torah, and even the case that the Torah is in. Also, for example, a shofar, if it breaks or falls, something like that, we don't need to take it to be put in the Geniza. But tefillin, for example, we must treat it in a different way and put it in the Geniza. Now let's try to explain what exactly Geniza means. So Geniza is basically treating it in a very holy and respectful way. If, let's say, this tefillin is, and they brought a tefillin in the middle of the process. It's not a tefillin that was actually ever used. So we'll talk a little bit more about tefillin. I think Rabbi Katzman will talk a little bit more about tefillin. But if this tefillin and the parchments that inside, this basically, like Rabbi Katzman said, this is the main important thing. We can't see them here, but let's use the mezuzah as an example. Okay, this is a mezuzah house. It's not the mezuzah itself. If we will open it, we will find the actual mezuzah in it. Okay, these are the instructions that Rabbi Katzman said that were thrown out. Okay, but this is the holy item. This is the item that needs to be taken to Geniza. Geniza basically means to bury it in a very respectful way. It needs to be treated in a very respectful way, to bury it in the ground in order not to throw it out in any other way. So this is the holy thing, and also the entire tefillin, the case of the tefillin that we see here, and also of course the parchments inside. All these things need to be taken to Geniza, need to be treated respectfully and buried in a very specific place in a very specific way. And so of course shofar and even tzitzis, even talis that, let's say, was ruined or too old, we not always need to take it to Geniza. We always can put it in the Geniza. And if you have a talis in your house that you don't know what to do with and you want to get rid of, always it's better to ask a rabbi to bring it to one of the synagogues, and they will help you to decide what to do with it. Even if you want to throw it out, still you need to do it in a very respectful way because we use it for mitzvah. But the Gemara basically defines two different types of items that we use. Some of them what we call tashmishei kedusha, holy items, and some of them are what we call tashmishei mitzvah that we use in order to fulfill a mitzvah. Like, for example, the lulav that we use on sukkahs. What's interesting about the lulav, for example, is that even though after sukkahs is over, basically we can just wrap it in 2 bags and throw it out, still is a very interesting and fascinating custom to use something that we used for a mitzvah and to continue to use it for another mitzvah. So many people keep it until it's Pesach time in order to use it, in order to burn the chametz that we have an obligation to burn when right before Pesach, in order to use the item we used for a certain mitzvah, to use it again for another mitzvah.
Okay.
And for example, people do also with the tzitzis when it gets ripped or something. So they take the tzitzis and they use it as a bookmark or something in order not to throw it out, in order to still treat it in a respectful way. Katzman?
Got a question.
Yeah.
Before tonight, I since I wasn't familiar with the tomb Geniza, I Googled it to try and see if I could familiarize myself with what that was. And I came across images of blue dumpsters and holes in the ground with stuff just thumped in there. And I thought, this is a garbage dump. I mean, it was awful. It was an awful impression. What did I miss?
Okay, so in Israel, in many towns, there's like this blue dumpster. It's like a place that can put only, papers or something like that. And basically once a year, once a while that it's filled in, so the state or the government or a person that's in charge takes it and buries it in the ground. That's just a way to basically collect all these items. The problem that comes up, in Israel, I think more than any other place in the world, is that every Shabbos, believe it or not, but there are these types of I don't want to call them newspapers, but type of papers that we give that people give out in shul and synagogue, and many times these papers have quotes from the Torah. So if they have quotes from the Torah, there's a question or actually a possibility that it needs to be taken to be buried in a respectful way, like we said, because it's a holy now it's a holy paper. So that for that reason, in many places we have all these blue dumpsters or places to put these papers, because many people think that all these papers, all of them, need to be taken to Geniza. So try to imagine every week,
Sure.
hundreds of papers people who want to take to Geniza. Actually, most of them, let's say 90% out of the pages there don't really need to be taken to Geniza, and just all the advertisements of whatever they want to advertise in those papers don't need to be taken to Geniza. So in order to solve that, they have all these pictures that you saw.
So at some point in time in the year, there's a respectful parade of
Yes.
trucks hauling these things. Is that what happens?
And I can tell you that there are many famous stories about old synagogues, old places in the world. The most famous one is what we call Genizat Kair. Okay, and how do you say it? Cairo. In Cairo, they found many very old Torahs, and we have also Keter Ramtsova, the most ancient Torah that we have today. They found also in a Geniza that we, and what's beautiful about it, that it's a few hundred years ago, maybe more than that even, and it's still the same Torah that we use today. And always when I see that, it gives me the goosebumps that the same Torah. We would have expected that in 2,000 years things will be changed. Things always change. And if you wants to play the game, it's a very famous game in Israel called the broken phone. Okay, people sit in a circle and they whisper something in the person's ear, and they pass it around until it gets back to the first person that started it. He hears a totally different thing than what he started, because when you pass on stuff, that's nature, things change. And thanks to these Geniza that we people saved for many years, even though they were supposed to bury it, we found proofs of very old Torah scrolls that still have the same exact Torah that we use today, and I think it's amazing and fascinating.
Yeah, I think you probably wouldn't have a pleasant experience if you went to a city morgue as well.
Right.
Everything that becomes commercialized is going to lose a little bit of that touch,
Exactly.
unfortunately.
Exactly.
But the need to handle it respectfully is obvious. So the question is, what makes something holy? Okay, we're talking about the end. What's the beginning? What makes something holy? Anybody have a suggestion?
Strengthens your relationship with God.
Okay. So if you do something that strengthens your relationship with God, that would define it as holy. Very good. Anybody else? Okay, so we have something that's called Kiddusha, Kadosh. Kadosh means holy. What makes something holy? So really the only one that can make something holy is God. God created everything and he created holiness. But he didn't create it in the very beginning. In the very beginning, we say, Bereshit bara Elokim. In the beginning, God created the heavens and earth. And fast forward a few years, when God is responding to Moshe, after Moses is complaining about the status of the Jewish people in Egypt, God said, you're complaining, but you must realize that there was a relationship earlier. There was a relationship with Abraham, with Isaac, with Jacob, with Noah, but they never had the exposure that you had. Shmi Hashem, and the name of the name that I'm using now, which is a very unique revelation, didn't exist before. So the name Elohim, name Elohim, which is the name, the manifestation of God that creates the world, is a very limited and very condensed and very defined. And therefore, as we say in the Hallel, Hashemayim Shemayim LaHashem, the heavens belong to God, Haaretz, and the earth below was given to man. What does it mean? That there's a separation, there's that division, there's that obvious division. When God gives the Torah to Moses at Mount Sinai, that's when everything changes. That's the first time anything material became holy. Prior to the giving of the Torah, there was also Tefillin, but it didn't look like this. You know what it looked like? When you read in the Torah, which we're going to be reading this coming Shabbat, Vayetze, when Jacob goes and acquires the sheep from his father-in-law, from Laban, and part of the process, we see that he's carving sticks. So we're told that he was just playing games. He was trying to be an artist. No, that was his expression of tefillin. Jacob didn't wrap it the way we did because that only came later when God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. But idealistically and a spiritual code, so to speak, those carvings were a sign just like the tefillin are a sign. The only difference was that those sticks, after Yaakov finished doing his prayers, and we know that he prayed a lot. I mean, he tells Esau when he comes back that he prayed and God saved him. Those prayers that was done, perhaps maybe even with greater emotion than our davening today. You know what he did with those sticks? He trashed them. He didn't even put them into those blue containers. Just trashed them because they didn't intercept any holiness, because the division from above and below existed to the fullest. So there was sort of like a visitation, so to speak, God connected, but it never stuck. God came down, spoke to Jacob, and holiness goes back, and Jacob is back where he started. Moses, the revelation at Mount Sinai, that changed everything. That's when the MIDRASH actually gives a parable. There was the Roman king who didn't allow people that pretty much like the Iron Curtain existed, and then the decree was annulled, and now you can go up and you can go down, and there's free travel. Spiritually, that happened when God comes down to Sinai, and Moses is told to come up to the mountain on behalf of the Jewish people. That's when the Iron Curtain comes down. That's when the division comes down. So that was the very first time that holiness was able to take hold in physical reality. So, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, when the first of the 10 Commandments, I am God your God, right? So we're told in the Talmud that Anochi is an acronym of 4 words. Ana, Nafshi, Tavit, Yahavit, which means that I am writing myself into the Torah.
Oh.
That's an incredible concept. God is writing himself into the Torah. So of course the Torah becomes holy.
Sure.
God isn't playing games. Exactly what it means, it's impossible for us to comprehend as human beings. But if God says it, that's what it is. So if we see godliness in that scroll that started out as being part of a cow, and now through all the evolutions, but all by God's command. By the way, I don't know if you know this, but most of the Torahs that were written in the 2000 to about 2010 came from Omaha. There was a place downtown because the preferred material to be used for Torahs are shlil, which I'm sure Rabbi Yoni is going to talk about in a moment, which comes from an unborn fetus. So it's very soft and they're pure because they haven't yet messed around in this world. So because they're pure and innocent, that's why they're preferred. So it was actually produced right here in Omaha, and from here they would have to send it back to Israel. That's where they processed it. But from the very beginning of the process here, it had to be the button and the big vats where they were putting the lime and all that. All those steps had to be done for the sake of the mitzvah of Torah or Tefillin or Mezuzah. So all these things have to be done for that in mind, and only when it's done with that in mind, then you have a perfectly kosher, holy Torah. But that holiness is a process that happens because God said so. So you're right when you say your communication with God, but God is the one that writes the instructions. So if you decide you're gonna, serve God through riding horses, which actually some people do, they find their spirituality, but there's no mitzvah in riding horses. You might find some aloof stuff, but only what God tells us. So that's why when we're talking about a mezuzah, if the mezuzah isn't exactly the way the halacha requires that it be, then it's not a mezuzah. It's a nice idea. The Talmud talks about people who would put in all other types of kameos, other types of charms, and it's not appropriate. They might be great, but that's not the mitzvah. This is a mitzvah, it's a very specific mitzvah. So I think that once we understand that holiness is not something that's subjective, but it comes from up high, it comes from God himself, then it becomes a little bit more acceptable to treat it properly. And I see many people come in Chabad, I'm sure they come to Beth Israel also with those books that they have from their parents or grandparents that are left over. Because we realize that this was printed, this was used, and especially if it was actually prayed with for so many years, that it sort of absorbs a sanctity that's really second to none. And that sanctity, I don't know if you've probably heard about the preschool teacher who tells the children they should make a picture of God. And one kid makes a picture of the grandfather, the other one made a picture of some general in the army, and a little girl makes a picture of a scale. She says, "What's that?" He says, "I don't know, but anytime my mother gets on the scale, she says, 'Oh God, my God.'" Now, godliness. So we think that God is only in the shul. God is everywhere, and that's why the mitzvah of having the mezuzah on your doorpost, in your home, in your bedroom, in your kitchen, in your dining room, that's about God teaching us that God is everywhere, and He's near the scale too. He's everywhere, literally. And but there are certain things that really stand out, right? Because the scale, once it breaks, you don't have to bury it. You can throw it in the garbage. But the mezuzah or the pamphlets, as Rabbi Yoni was discussing before, these days, everybody's printing, words of Torah, and everyone has an opinion. Everyone has a platform, and it becomes a problem with the shuls. A lot of the synagogues end up having, after Shabbos, all these pamphlets that were brought in. What are we going to do with it now?
So if the words appear on a page, regardless of how they got there,
Exactly. Yes.
I'll
You're gonna go
explain.
in, yeah, okay.
It's actually, we have basically, so I think Rabbi Katzman, I'd like to
Sure.
jump in a few things that you were talking about, so if I repeat some stuff, I hope it's okay. So Rabbi Katzman said that basically the name of Hashem is holy. Okay, so we all know that there are 7 names of God, of Hashem, in the Torah. So all these 7 names are not allowed to be erased. Once you wrote them, I mean, if a scribe writes them on a parchment, we're not allowed to erase them. It comes many times. I can tell you as a person that writes Mezuzah and Tefillin, it's many times it's a big problem. For Ashkenazim, it's even a bigger problem. But sometimes there's a drop of ink that falls, and changes a little bit the name of God, and that's a big problem. First of all, it violates the entire Mezuzah, Tefillin, or whatever you're writing, and we're not allowed to erase it. If we're not allowed to erase it, I can start a mezuzah. It happens to be the 3rd word in the mezuzah is the name of God, because the mezuzah starts with the shmaisa, the famous shmaisa that we say every day, a few times a day, and we're not allowed to erase this name. And by this name that's written on a piece of paper, this needs to be taken into Geniza. So every paper basically has one of these 7 names of God. Fortunately, I can't mention them out loud. Then it needs to be taken into to the special place that we call Geniza. So that's about what I think what you asked. And yes, it's even if you print it from a computer, it's a big question. I mean, you shouldn't write it. You shouldn't print it with the real name of God. It's even though it was a big question if you should write it, on a computer. It's also not so simple. I can tell you that today, I mean, the only way to write a mezuzah, to write a Torah, to write a Tefillin is by copying it from a different place. You're not supposed to write it from your memory. So, for example, when I received, we call it Tikkun Sofrim, the place that you copy from, in many places, it doesn't appear the full name of God, only, almost, or, one line is missing or something that you won't, that piece of paper won't basically return to be a thing that needs to be taken to Geniza, because by writing the name of God, basically you turn that thing and to become holy. And I think this is what Rabbi Katzman was saying, that the name of God, the name of Hashem, is what turns it into be holy. I'd like to jump now to the topic of Mezuzah that Rabbi Katzman spoke. Last week, this Sunday actually, I came back from a very interesting and nice trip in Houston. We spent a few days in Houston. Afterwards, we did Dallas. So on Shabbos, we were there. We joined a very nice and small community for the davening and Shabbos. And after Shachrit, we joined them for Kiddush. And the rabbi said an interesting story that the Kiddush was sponsored by a family that they had a few problems in their house. I think one of the daughters didn't feel so well, and they had a car accident, and they had a few disasters that happened, in their family. And they decided that they need to check the mezuzah that they have on each door in their house. And happens to be that they found a few problems and a few mezuzahs that were hanging in their house. So I just want to explain, a mezuzah is not,
Charm.
A charm. Okay, it's not something that, if you put on your door frame, it will protect you. But we do believe that if it's on your door frame and it's not halachically, and it's not according to the halacha, the right way it's supposed to be, it can cause some problems, not because of that, because you're not fulfilling the mitzvah, and I'll try to explain. I heard the ones from one of the rabbis of Yeshiva University, a very interesting explanation about the mezuzah that we have on our doors. So we all know that pre-COVID, we used to pass next to a mezuzah and we used to put our hand and give a kiss, right? And people used to just, go and, pass their hand on the door frame and continue forward. I used to do it so often that even in places without a mezuzah, I used to walk, and touch the door frame and continue. But the reason that we do that it's not only to kiss it because we think it's holy and it is a holy, but not because we want to kiss it just because. And he explained in a very beautiful way. And he said that the idea of touching the mezuzah is before we leave our house, before we enter our house, we stop for a moment and we put our hand on the mezuzah and we remember who we are. We remember what the mezuzah means. And we remember what we represent. And by that, we leave our house. And when we leave our house, we take with us everything that the mezuzah represents, everything that it means to be a Jewish person, that it's in this mitzvah of mezuzah. And we stop for a moment, we put our hand on the mezuzah and remember who we are. And that's how we go out to the world, by remembering that we are Jewish people. And when we come home, before we enter our house, we stop for a moment and we leave everything that's not relevant, that's not supposed to come into our house. And we stop and we put our hand on the mezuzah again. And we say, okay, this is who we are. This is what we want to represent. This is what we need to remember. And by that, with that, we're going into our house. And that's basically the way that we need to live as Jews, surrounded with the mezuzah, with the tefillin, with the name of Hashem all around us, to remember who we are and what we exactly represent in this world. I can talk about tefillin and mezuzah and how to write it for hours. I'm not sure we have hours, but I will try to jump again and add to what Rabbi Katzman said before. The cow that we make the tefillin, we make the parchments, we make all these holy things. The cow is not holy. Even though I heard many times, I don't know in English, I hope it's not something bad, but I heard the term holy cow. Okay, cows are not holy. But okay, I don't know what it means, sorry. But yet, this is a piece of how do you say?
Hide of a cow.
Okay, thank you. Okay, that we make slowly from this, basically the tefillin that we have. This is also not the final way that tefillin looks like. There's another step in the process of making tefillin. Okay, but this is made out of a cow. I mean, it sounds crazy, but the cow is not holy but when we take the parchment, take the leather, and turn it into a holy thing, and we write the name of Hashem on the parchment, that's what turns it into to be holy. And like Rabbi Katzman said about the process. So this is basically a piece of leather that was starting in the middle, part of the process, put into seed. How do you say seed? Lime. Okay, thank you for translating. Okay, so this is the white stuff that you see here. And again, all this process needs to be in the sake of heaven. It was the name of God, name of Hashem. And I think many of you are familiar with Leon Shrego that recently made Aliyah and moved to Israel. And he used to do as part of the process here, used to stand, and before they put it into the seed, into this lime, thank you, he used to say the words L'shem MITZVOT or L'shem Kedushat Tefillin or Mezuzah or whatever this was supposed to be used to. And it's very important because by designating it to be something holy, it's a big problem to use it for anything else. So you're supposed not to ask, how come using it for just showing us, it's supposed to be holy, right? So we of course do like a tnai, like a condition, thank you. That of course if it won't become a tefillin in the end, so then we'll be able to use it for different things. But again, we need to treat it and to respect it in a very specific way. But it's a very long process, very interesting process. There's a lot more to learn. But I think I spoke enough. Rabbi Katzman, please.
Do you have any questions or issues you wanted to address on this subject?
Are the texts that are written on there, are they always the same? Is it?
Oh, very good
It's always
question.
the same?
So sometimes they decide, to pick new. No, just kidding. It's all the same for many years. And if you Google online, you will see that they found tefillin. They don't look exactly like this. They look a little bit different. But tefillin they found in the caves of Qumran in Israel, in the area of the Dead Sea. And the scientists tried to figure out from when these tefillin, they designated it to the time of the rebellion of Bar Kokhba. That means around 2,000 years ago. But yet there were the same parchment, same tefillin, like almost looks like you can see it's the same tefillin we use today. A little bit, these will look much nicer today with the technology that we have. But it's amazing. I mean, the same thing for so many years, all the same.
Yeah, also there's tell the story after the pogroms. I'm sure you all heard about those terrible events that took place in Russia. So after one of these pogroms, which was not, there were a few that were not approved by the government. So this fellow who's not Jewish, who was accused of illegally looting other Jewish homes. Police officer goes in and he inspects the house and he finds a few sets of tefillin over there. He says, which house did you take this from? He says, what do you mean where I took it from? Sam sapozhnik. I'm a shoemaker myself. I'm a shoemaker, so I have leather. I work with leather. So obviously not realizing that the straps of the tefillin are unique. So so the importance of doing any mitzvah for the sake of the mitzvah is important no matter whether it's tzedakah. Right? You give charity, you can give it because you feel bad for the person. Or you want to get your tax deduction anyway. So you might as well give it rather than the government will give it to an organization of your choice. But that very same act, as Jews, must be done because God said so. There's a big difference between giving because God said so versus giving because you feel like giving it, or you want to sleep better at night, or whatever it is. The mitzvah is very specific, and it's very much a holy act. Every mitzvah is a holy act. So, when we're baking matzahs, for example, the matzah, if you go into a matzah bakery before Pesach, the special designated matzah bakeries that do, whether it's machine or handmade, either one, the process also, from the very beginning, is being done for the sake of the mitzvah of matzah. Just like the leather, as mentioned before. If the leather is produced with the intention of using it for shoes or coats, and then you say, well, this would make a nice Torah. You can't do that. You can't switch in the middle of the game if it hasn't been designated from the very beginning. So that sort of really helps us understand a little bit more of what the designation of holy really means. And when God tells us that we should be a holy people, is likewise. Holy people is very unique. You talk about changing the Torahs. There's another group of people that have a New Testament. We don't. One of the things that I've always been amazed, I traveled quite a bit in my younger years and went to communities where, quite frankly, I don't know what movie it is, but they tell this Ashkenazi Jew, funny, you don't look Jewish, because in many South American countries, many European countries, we don't look Jewish. The Sephardic Jews, Moroccan Jews, and so on. And even when we sit around the table, the songs that they sing on Shabbos, because of the fact that we were separated for so many years, so many centuries, there are so many differences. But to me, the most fascinating thing when you go to the Torah, no matter where in the world you go to, you have the standing Torahs that have these silver covers. You have all types of Torahs, and the form of the letter might even be a little different because there is the Sephardic script, there's the Ashkenazi script, and the Russians, there's the Chabad script. There are certain differences, but the fact that every single letter in every Torah, anywhere you go around the world, is the exact same, to me, that's fascinating.
And
Never changed.
I'd like to add to that. There's a story that I mean, again, always I love to tell and always gives me the goosebumps again. When not so long ago, after the establishment of the state of Israel, there was all these missions and programs to bring Jews from all over the world back to Israel. And one of the missions was to bring the Jews from Yemen to Israel. But there was a big concern, a big worry back in Israel, because the Jews in Yemen were always isolated. They were always, by themselves. They had their own tradition. They were always separated from the rest of the world. And there was a big concern when the Yemenite Jews will come to Israel and will open their Torah. What will find in there? Maybe it will be totally different. So the first plane that arrived was the first Torah that arrived to Israel. Right away, rabbis took the Torah and they opened it against the Torah that we had in the world that was known. And they checked letter by letter, space by space, word by word, sentence by sentence, everything from top to bottom. Took them a very long time. And they wanted to make sure that it's the same Torah. And you know what they discovered?
Probably was.
You think it was?
I don't know.
It was or wasn't?
I would say yes.
They will say yes. Happens to be that it wasn't the same.
Mirrors,
What's that?
mirrors.
What,
Mirrors?
what does that mean?
Steve,
mirror.
one more time, Steve.
Okay. So I'll make a long story short. It was almost, it was 99% exactly the same. I mean, the meaning of the words were exactly the same, but they found 7 letters that were different. One of the comes to my head right now is we have in the Torah says Betzua Daka. So so the difference was Daka we can write Daled Kuf Hey. That's the way that we write, but in the Yemenite one it said Daled Kuf Aleph. The meaning is the exact same meaning, but yet was something that caused waves all over the world, because suddenly we found a Torah that they believed that was the same Torah for many years, and they followed their tradition and everything. And we believe that, but yet for me it's fascinating that it's exactly the same. The meaning is exactly the same. There are only 7 small differences that didn't change anything by the meaning, but yet 7 changes that caused until today. It's one of the things that people try to figure out who was right. And until today, the Yemenite Jews continue their tradition to write it the same way that they received from generation to generation, and the rest of the world continues also the way that they received. So I think it's fascinating. But yet, for me, the idea of the same Torah, and they were totally, separated for over 2,000 years. There was no connection, almost barely connection. The only connection that we know of is what we call Got Teiman, that the Maimonides wrote to these Jews that were always exiled and always separated and always, isolated. But yet they followed the same rules, the same Torah. And it's amazing. Today, we can't imagine that people, someplace in the world are not connected. How can that be? But even 30 years ago, people weren't so connected.
Was there a similar situation with the Ethiopian Jews?
No.
No?
No, I don't know the exact story about the Ethiopian Jews. I hope I'm saying something and I hope I'm not wrong. So if someone knows differently, please correct me. But as far as I know, the tradition says that they were exiled a long time before. Part of the destruction of the first temple, not the second temple. And as far as I know, they didn't have their original tradition of the Torah. They followed one of the other traditions that from other places in the world. So they don't have, for the Torah, they don't have something unique like the Yemenites that had their own unique Torah that was followed for generation to generation. But again, I hope I'm not saying anything wrong. I need to check that.
Yeah, that's actually why the rabbinate at the time recommended that they go through a conversion, just to play it safe.
Sure.
Because if they didn't, and you start tracing back, and they didn't really follow the rules as Rabbi just mentioned, that would make it worse, because then if there's divorce and marriage, and see that can cause a bigger problem with illegitimacy versus if you just go through a conversion. But I just wanted to mention one thing as well. Thank you very much for this description. So I actually got my SOFR certification a little before Rabbi Yoni, but so I have enough time to forget most of it already. That's the point. But it really was fun because the fellow that I learned with, I had no intention of learning how to write because I'm not an artist, but I just wanted to know the rules so I can check a mezuzah and so on. But he said, no, the rabbi convinced me, go ahead, he'll do it. And he explained that there was a technique. It's not, you don't have to be an artist. It's not so much the art of your hand, but it's as long as you can prepare the feather properly and sort of learn the technique. So once it changed from art to a technique, it became something that was doable. Now, I didn't finish writing a Torah.
Not yet.
Not yet. But there's really a lot in it. And to me, at least, especially when I got to write the letters that would comprise God's name, it was too scary for me. You know, it was overwhelming. I sort of got this anxiety and I just couldn't do it. So I put it down and I went on. But it's interesting also, when you talk about the Hebrew letters, the 24 letters in the Hebrew alphabet are the letters that God uses to create the world. And they all represent such depth, and such holiness in itself. Every letter, the Aleph, for example, right? The Aleph has a Yud on the top and a Yud below. And then there's the Vav, the line that connects the above and below. 26. Just 26, exactly, which is the numeric value of God's name. And it represents the supreme Yud and the Yidala, who in Yiddish we refer to the Jewish people as that little Yud down below. And then there is that rod, that connection, which are the mitzvahs that God gives us, through which we can create that current. So it's a phenomenal idea when we think about how God is really, for lack of a better word, going out of his way to create a relationship with us after he created those divisions. So in other words, there's that separation, there's that standoff, and then God sort of says, come on, please come my way, because God doesn't like the separation. So separation was just created in order for us to reach out. Because if there was never a separation, then reaching out wouldn't be an option, which is the case with the angels. All the angelic worlds that we describe in our davening, the angels who say Kadosh, Kadosh, and Baruch Kavod, and all those prayers, we're describing those angels who really never separate themselves from the knowledge of God. Of course, they don't sin. They have no temptation. They've never seen any evil. They never got close to it. And as we read earlier in the parsha, where the few angels did come down to this world, they became worse than the man. So we have an incredible challenge, and it's difficult, but the opportunities that we have is very unique. And through the Torah, through these holy objects, we're able to do what would otherwise be impossible. You can jump off the roof, but you can't jump up. So all these avenues, and for that matter, all the mitzvahs. So when we do mitzvahs, it's important to do it exactly to the T, not to the T, but to the Aleph. Why? Because very often we say, you'll let's say separate the dairy and the milk, or the dairy and the meat, or other mitzvahs. We very often say God really doesn't doesn't care if we're not scrupulous, as long as we have good intentions, which to a degree is true, but in reality, from our part, we should try to do it exactly the same way. Because imagine, as the rabbi mentioned earlier also, when you're writing a Torah, and most sofers, after writing, a few hundred Torahs, they know the entire Torah by heart. But it's forbidden. It's forbidden to write it by memory. You must have, either another Torah or a copy of the Torah laying right in front of you, and every letter look at the original and write the same thing. Look at the original, write the same thing. There's a good chance, it's a very good chance with many that they're going to do it perfectly without it. But imagine if that would have become, if any of the sofers along the chain would have become a little lackadaisical about it. And maybe yesterday or tomorrow they're fine, but today they're a little hazy. Don't make a mistake. So the fact that we were so careful throughout the generations when it comes to the Torah, that should really be a good lesson for us for all other mitzvahs, to do it exactly the way our Bubby's done it, the way our Zadie's done it. The packaging, certain things change, but the essence of every mitzvah, because it's God's command, is to be kept and followed and adhered to with the greatest level of care, just like we want our surgeon, God forbid, if we have to be under the knife, he should be very careful and not sloppy in any way. So that's it. I mean, there's so much to learn from the Torah and about the Torah itself, and really glad that Rabbi Yoni finally got his certification as well. So I would encourage everyone that's here to take the mezuzahs off your door, or you can give one of us a call. We'll be happy to visit. We do house calls free of charge as well. And so there's actually a double benefit in making a house call, because very often you might not have it on the proper side of the door, might not be the proper height, angle, all those details are important. Again, you can Google everything. You can ask Rabbi Google, that'll help you, but not every Google source is authorized or accurate. So that's why we're here, to make it easier and to make it as proper as possible, and your tefillin or all of the other things. And likewise, for that matter, not only should you have a mezuzah, but every Jewish home, one of the mitzvahs that I've also encouraged, every Jewish home should have as many Jewish books as possible. That also brings sanctity into the house. You have a Chumash, you have a Mishnah, even some of the stuff you might not be able to read. But so not yet, exactly, not yet. But chances are, if it's in the house, you might learn how to read it. And for that, we also have options here to learn how to read Hebrew. I'm sure Mike has the information on that. But the need to bring holiness in every possible way, or as much as possible as we can, even if it's just bringing a bagel. I'm only kidding. But there is something about bagels. There is something about Jewish culture, about the kugel, about different dishes that bring a certain sanctity, certain holiness, and especially in December, when many of our neighbors deck their homes and indoors, outdoors with other types of things, we have to be sure to bring as much sanctity into our home, because it doesn't only affect us personally, but it affects the environment.
Let's make sure before we leave tonight, make sure that we take a look and see if anybody has any questions out in Zoom land. Not sure I see any hands up or anything like that, but it looks like
Nothing has popped up, and I haven't seen any hands go up. So
I would like to finish with the story, even though I have,
okay, good. Go ahead.
have many. Sorry. Someone on Zoom.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Steve.
All right. There are people who, in English, won't, when it comes to saying G-O-D, they'll put the O and put a hyphen. Now, are we dealing with that kind of thinking? And what would you say about that?
That's a very good point, Steve. So as we mentioned earlier, putting God in the synagogue and leaving him there and not allowing him onto the golf course or in our homes is not the Jewish way. We believe that everything and everywhere God should be invited and should be part of what goes on. Now, when you're writing, so just like the 7 names that Rabbi Yoni mentioned earlier are designated names for God that are holy, then there are other euphemisms that are used that doesn't take on the same level of holiness. Now, when you translate it into English, that's already something that becomes technically, halachically questionable. So there are certain names, I know over the years when, the Orthodox started translating the Siddur into English, there were questions as to which names, how they be translated, whether Lord, for example, whether that really has the connotation of God's name, or is it just more of a generic name that could be used for God as Abraham uses concerning the angels. So there are different questions, but the word God clearly, according to most opinions, will denote the name of God. And so therefore, if we do write it out, it's okay to write it out, but then we won't be able to trash it. We'll have to put in the Geniza. So if you're okay keeping it and making sure that it ends up in the Geniza, then that's fine. But if you're not certain, so for example, in a Siddur, when you're translating it, so chances are that the Siddur is going to be kept in its full respect and sanctity, then that's perfectly fine, because you also don't want it to be difficult for the reader. If he's not used to that dash, so just spell it out, write it out exactly, so I'll be able to read it easily. So it's preferable even to do it that way, but you're more confident that the Siddur is going to be dealt with properly. But if you're just writing a note, then it's preferred just to put a dash in. That way there's no questions, and you can put it in the recycling bin, no problem.
Any other questions? Okay, so now
Thank you.
I'll try
For
to
me,
finish.
that was very informative. I appreciate your time and I
I'll
appreciate.
try to finish with the story. if
Oh,
you have
I'm
one
sorry.
minute.
Yeah, go
Okay, when we came here 3 years ago, so I don't know if you remember, but a short while afterwards, started this thing called COVID. You all remember what I'm talking about? Okay,
It's kind of
so
cold or something.
I don't remember. It was so long ago. Just kidding.
Political.
So COVID hit, and basically we closed the shul, and we closed the synagogue for a short while. Thank God it was only a short while. Baruch Hashem, was only a short while, and we tried to figure out how to communicate with our members. I mean, with Jews in town, even though the shul is closed. And one of the ideas that we decided to do is what we called a taste of Shabbos. So we started driving from house to house, and giving out small packages of challah, grape juice, cookies, a small taste of Shabbos for all those that normally come to shul or want to come to shul, and now the shul is closed, they won't be able to attend. And we were really new here in town, and I took the list from the computer, and I put the address in the GPS, and I started driving to places that was never been before. And I remember always, it was Friday right before Shabbos, and I came to a house, and I always remember, the fear. I mean, if I'll knock on someone else's door and he'll be really mad at me, what I'm doing here, like, how can I really make sure that this is the right house? And every time the same problem came up. And I think what's beautiful, and it's amazing, and until today, I think it's one of the most beautiful experiences that I had here in Omaha, is that every house that we came to, every Jewish house had a mezuzah under a door frame. That's how I knew that I'm in the right place, according to the mezuzah that was on the door. So again, like Rabbi Katzman said, I highly recommend for those who don't have a mezuzah yet to hurry up and put a mezuzah on. And those who have a mezuzah, this is a perfect time to check it, see if it's really kosher. Because again, by having it only on the door without nothing in it, or even with having something not kosher in it, I mean, you're not fulfilling the mitzvah, the obligation, so it's basically nothing. And the same thing, I highly recommend about tefillin. Many people in the past 2.5 years gave me tefillin to check, and I'm sure they gave it to Rabbi Katzman to check. Tefillin is a little bit more complicated, but Baruch Hashem, I brought all the materials from Israel in order to open the tefillin and check also the inside to make sure everything is still the right way. Many times it's something that's really hard to fix if it's already ruined, but if it's not correct, if it's got erased or something happened to it and you use it, so basically you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of tefillin or mezuzah. So I think it's a very good opportunity to reach out and check them.